The next morning, a grey mist clung stubbornly to the canal as Inspector Arvid Keller arrived from Munich. Keller was a tall, thin man with a slightly worn look, as though the world had disappointed him more often than it had pleased him. He carried the quiet weight of a man who had seen too much to be easily fooled, yet he retained a flicker of curiosity, a refusal to accept the easy answer. He was not a man who trusted gossip, no matter how loudly it was whispered. He trusted evidence, the silent witnesses that never lied, and his long experience had taught him that the most dangerous lies were often the ones a community told itself. A comforting narrative woven to hide an uncomfortable truth. He met with the local police chief, a stout man with an air of self-satisfaction. The chief handed him a folder, thick with initial reports and witness statements. "It's quite clear," the chief began confidently, his voice booming slightly in the damp air. "Maren Dorner is at the center of everything. She had the motive, the opportunity." Sheila raised a hand gently, a gesture that was not dismissive, but simply a request for patience. "Let me see the scene before you tell me the ending," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He preferred to let the physical space tell its own story, uncolored by preconceived notions or the rush to close a case. He knew that the first few hours of an investigation were critical, a delicate dance between observation and interpretation. Once a theory took root, it could blind you to all other possibilities. Inside the villa, the air was still and heavy. Sunlight filtered weakly through the tall, grand windows, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the gleaming parquet floor. The drawing room was almost too neat, disturbingly so. It felt staggered, like a set prepared for a play that had ended in tragedy. Every cushion on the plush sofa was perfectly plumped and angled. Every book on the dark mahogany shelf was aligned with military precision. It was a kind of tidiness that spoke not of order, but of a desperate attempt to control chaos. Keller's gaze settled on the ornate coffee table in the center of the room. One delicate porcelain cup, used with a faint lipstick stain on the rim. Next to it, another cup, untouched, its dark, liquid, cold and still. And then he saw it, a faint, almost invisible ring on the polished wood, a watermark that indicated a third cup had once stood there, but had been meticulously removed. Interesting. Why remove one cup? Why leave the other two? It was a small detail. But in Keller's world, small details were everything. They were the loose threads that, when pulled, could unravel the entire tapestry of a lie. He crouched near the body of Elsa Richter, her form draped elegantly on a chaise longue, a tragic centerpiece to this pristine room. Her face was peaceful, almost serene, but her wrist bore a fresh scratch. It was small, a thin red line against her pale skin, but it was unmistakably a defensive wound. It spoke of a struggle, a last-second resistance that contradicted the peaceful scene. Someone had held her, and she had tried to fight back. Next, he moved to Heinrich Richter, who lay near the fireplace. Keller carefully retrieved the torn piece of paper the local officers had noted in his pocket. It was a fragment, ripped from a larger page. Only half of a sentence remained. The handwriting, a desperate scrawl. "Cannot carry this alone anymore." A suicide note, or something else entirely. A confession, a plea for help. He folded the fragile piece of paper carefully and placed it in an evidence bag. The words hung in the air, a cryptic message from the grave. Keller stood again, his eyes slowly scanning the entire room, taking in every detail, every shadow, every misplaced object, or, in T's case, every perfectly placed one. He ran a hand through his hair, the gears of his mind turning, processing the contradictions, the perfect room, the defensive wound. The third cup, the cryptic note. None of it fit the simple narrative of a murder-suicide born of passion. "This is not a crime of passion," A sighed softly, more to himself than to the waiting police chief. "And it's not a simple suicide either." He felt a familiar sensation, the feeling of standing on the edge of a much deeper, darker story. Something here is missing, something important. His gaze was drawn towards the tall windows, their heavy curtains closed, shutting out the world in the grey canal that flowed silently past the villa. The water outside held its own secrets, mirroring the murky depths of the human heart. The neatness of the room was a facade, a barrier. The truth wasn't here. Locked inside these walls with the dead, and I suspect, Keller continued, his voice gaining a new edge of determination, the answers lie outside. He walked towards the window and pulled back the heavy curtain, letting the pale lights flood the room, as if to illuminate the lies he was just beginning to uncover. The investigation had just begun.